You're watching Introducing Family Values at Work by Dr. Alyssa Gaul on Resonance Wellness TV, part of our Helping Dr. Mom series that seeks to inspire and educate about natural health and holistic family life. Of course, this is Introducing Family Values at Work, and this is part of our Helping Dr. Mom series through Resonance Wellness. So this is going to be recorded to watch later as well. So hopefully you will, you don't have to take notes. So I want to begin by saying I'm really happy that you all are all interested in being, a better coach and leader for your kids. You're here because you care about that relationship that you have with your family and you want to strengthen and build it. And that's really fantastic. The goal here is really to look at releasing old limiting beliefs and ideas about what parenting means, and to try and replace them with your own empowering beliefs. Now, of course, we're only going to be talking here for less than an hour, so we're not going to be able to complete, every single issue, but hopefully we'll be able to reflect on your personal experiences and relationship with your own parents and start to understand that parenting really starts with you and your relationship to yourself. You'll also learn to distinguish between main parenting paradigms, and you'll have a chance to get a brief overview of how the perspective of a child really changes over development and how communication must change depending on age. So I just wanted to start and let you know too that there are a couple of other Helping Dr. Mom events planned this year. We're going to do a Simplify Motherhood event in October, which is another webinar like this one, so same format. And then there's also going to be holistic newborn care for those of you with newborns in December. But in September, ideally, we're going to have a live event, a workshop event for parents to get together on the 21st. We're just confirming where we're going to have that. And it's basically going to be a workshop about what we're really seeing in kids developmentally from birth to age 21. Now, I'm going to talk about that a little bit today and do a summary of some of the things that I think most people don't really realize about child development that can be really helpful from a parental perspective. But keep your eyeballs peeled for September 21st. And if you're interested in attending that, if you let us know, that's always great, because then we can keep you in the loop about what's going on so that you don't miss it. All right, so let's begin. So I just wanted to start, to talk a little bit about parenting philosophy. And obviously this is a proverb here: before ever planting a seed, you must first cultivate the soil. And our parenting philosophy is really born out of the messages and memories and behaviors we learned during our own childhood from the people who raised us. When we find ourselves struggling with parenting, we can't really just look at our child's behavior, but we also have to explore why it is that we're triggered by our child's behavior. So the first step here is really to take some time to reflect on what residual feelings or beliefs you might have that are the result of your own childhood, or maybe are continuing to this day because you continue to have relationships to your parents, and often where there hasn't been a lot of separation between yourself and your parents, the patterning from early in childhood continues to exist, even though, as you've realized, you've gotten a lot older and hopefully somewhat wiser. But some questions to think about are, were your parents emotionally or physically harsh on you? Did they punish you? How were you punished? And why were you most likely to attract the negative or positive attention of a parent? And do you remember being afraid of your parents or feeling like you got missed messages from your parents? I mean, I think most people's experiences include a lot of negative memories, not just positive ones, but a lot of negative ones too. So when we look at those things that we have experienced, we have to understand that our unconscious mind really accounts for 90% of our behavior. If you're a current client, you'll probably have heard me say that autonomically, or the part of the nervous system that's automated and taking care of the things that you're usually not conscious of, processes data at about 1 million bits per second. And your conscious mind really does 10. So what can often happen is there's a lot of content in the unconscious mind that drives behaviors in a way where we're not always really present in the moment. So recalling past memories, sometimes even repressed ones, can be really key to understanding why you and your child maybe aren't connecting on the desired level. This could be a really difficult exercise for some, especially if you don't perceive your relationship with your own parents as a positive one. But, hang on tight, do your best. And after this class ends, see if you can make a list of all your caretakers, mother, father, perhaps other family members, hired ones like babysitters. Next to each name, come up with words and traits that you associate with them. And then just take it one step further by taking time to see if you can remember the clearest memories you have of each of those people. And try to be as objective as possible. But if there's emotionally charged parts, you can put that down too. And then find the parts that you like, things that actually were great, even in the people who ended up being negative, in the long run, because, sometimes that happens. But find the parts that you like and the parts you don't like and how it made you feel then and now. And then really decide what kind of action you would want to take with your own child in the here and the now that reflects what you really think is important or reflects what you'd like to revise about your own experience. And don't forget that if you learn mental field technique from me in the past, you can use this technique to sort out what really comes up in an exercise like this and release the traumas and reset that subconscious so as not to repeat the past. I know sometimes that seems like a very high expectation, but the reality is much of your own behavior can be very subconscious, unconscious, when you have those sort of things unprocessed. Now let's just take a quick look at paradigms of parenting. And I just want to kind of touch on 3 main styles of parenting. We want to talk about the dominant style of parenting. We want to talk about a laissez-faire approach of parenting. And then we're going to talk a little bit about peace of mind parenting. So somewhere that's kind of in the middle between those two extremes. Now, if we look first at dominant styles of parenting, this is a kind of parenting that could also be called traditional or old school, and it's what many of us grew up with. And a lot of the time, proponents of this method actually say that it is a kind of values-based parenting. However, it really does center around control, punishment, and consequence. So parents use a dominant style really to instill fear, with the belief that their kids won't act out or do the wrong thing out of fear, fear of the possible punishment. But that's very overwhelming to the child and to the will forces of the child, which really under those conditions, they're really under constant stress. So a child often finds no option under this style except to become pretty passive or to resort to aggression. So take a moment to reflect on this. Did you or anyone grow up with parents like this? Do you feel like sometimes you are a parent like this? And did that really prevent you or them from making bad decisions, this style? Or are you or the other person that you're thinking of close to those parents today? It's sometimes an irony that we can be closest to the people who treat us the poorest. And it's often very puzzling when people become parents themselves, and then they have to struggle to figure out which pieces do they want to keep and which pieces do they not want to keep from a parenting style. So what's happening when we enforce dominant parenting paradigms is that we're really crippling that child's emotional intelligence. And you might find yourself even in that set of circumstances where as an adult, you really struggle with emotional intelligence with your children. You don't know how to handle the emotions that they're having, or it makes you so emotional when they're upset that you don't really know what to do with that. In simple terms, emotional intelligence is allowing you to empathize with other people and learn and perform soft skills and generally build meaningful relationships with other people. Emotional intelligence has been proven to be a huge component of achieving future success, and even more so than a high IQ. And if you look at brain science, you'll see that when the brain experiences high levels of stress like this, it disables our ability to learn. So a lot of the time, those techniques we thought were teaching a lesson were actually quite literally stunting the brain's ability to learn out of fear and stress. And you get a lot of kids and adults in shutdown mode. And there's lots of ideas about why this has become so predominant. maybe on the surface, your kids have great manners or get their homework done and listen to what you say. But have you really cultivated a relationship with them? If a child does something that rubs us the wrong way, especially in a public setting, we're really faced with a moment of truth. Like, what do you do? How do you react? What's your first instinct? Many people just buckle under the social expectation and they do whatever has to be done to bring a situation back to order. But what does that look like? If a child is constantly put under threat of having to obey every word, and you become the enforcer, and you believe that that's going to make a child a better person, a child loves a parent more than anything. It doesn't matter how poorly the parent is behaving or the child is behaving. And it's very difficult for a child to reconcile that the foundation of love that they trusted can transform into fear or bad energy. So obviously this has been very socialized in our culture. Raising a child isn't easy. We're constantly facing challenges and stresses, even in our adult lives. And there's no handbook we get to reference for the right way to do something. And as parents, we want our children to thrive and be happy, and we want them to know how to behave. In a restaurant, we wanted them to experience the joy and freedom of childhood. And sometimes we just want them to sit quietly. So, there are moments of peace in the family. Up until this point in history, children have been primarily seen as less than, and the prevailing wisdom has been to use different forms of punishments and consequences, control children, and get them to comply with our wishes. But really, this method of parenting can really limit a child's ability to develop intrinsic motivation and emotional intelligence and empathy. And it really tends to create a deep need for approval, people pleasing, and other disempowering belief systems as kids grow into their teenage years and adulthood. And maybe you can identify this in yourself as well. Now, another style of parenting is known as the laissez-faire style of parenting. And I'm sure all of us have seen or maybe found ourselves in this position. And really, this is almost the style that's in opposition to the more authoritarian, dominant parenting style. It's really the anti-authoritarian style. And it shapes the parent-child relationship in a different way. And I'm sure you've seen examples of this, like where a child is really allowed to pretty much run over the parent and do what they want to do. And there's really not a lot of limitations put on that child. Under those conditions, children are overwhelmed. If you give your sympathies too readily, there's just no boundary. And children grow best not in a tight, restrictive container, but a space where there actually is a safety net, a safety boundary. And when there's extreme permissiveness, children become very restless. They're very uncertain. They usually get very cranky and demanding because they're constantly trying to figure out where the limit is. When you hold a child, you don't hold a child loosely. The impulse of a parent is always to hold like a baby or a toddler quite firmly. I'm sure you've had this experience yourself. And then physically, you're doing that. Emotionally and mentally, you also have to be doing that. If you have a child that's, gets disoriented easily, it's usually a child that really needs good boundaries. And because all of those attitudes, being disoriented and cranky and demanding, those are all signs that a child is really searching for appropriate behaviors to imitate. That doesn't mean we need to be super restrictive or over authoritarian. We just need to create a space that's safe for children to explore their own worlds. Now, somewhere in the middle, I think what we could do is call a peace of mind parenting paradigm. And that's kind of the midpoint between these two styles, because we want boundaries. We also want to create respect and structure, but we don't want the extreme of either. And I think in order to create that, the goal as a parent is really to create a deep connection, with your child by creating one with yourself. And I deal with lots of children in my practice, and many of their issues are directly related to how clear the adult in the situation is about who they are and what's important to them. And this is one of the reasons that when we deal with a problem in a child, I often must treat the main parent as well. And this is usually mom, but sometimes dad if he's the main caregiver. Parenthood reveals all the things that you did not integrate and fully understand from your own upbringing. Have you ever had the experience of sounding like your mom or your or your dad? It also reveals your own confusion about how things should look and the things that make you uncomfortable. Many parents reflexively attempt to control how the child is in order not to poke any of their own buttons. But long term, it's deeply unsatisfying to both the parent and the child. And the reality is that in the beginning, the parent-child relationship is entirely one-sided, and it only slowly becomes two-sided over the time. I've certainly observed parents who feel like their children is somehow a solution to one of their problems, and then quickly determine, with a short window of time that, children need a lot from you, especially when they're very young. And there's no deflecting that or escaping that. And if you already have had some difficulty really having a deep connection to yourself, this tends to blow this wide open. And then sometimes we go into either the very authoritarian parenting style and attempt to control what's going on, or we become very laissez-faire and just try to create this hands-off approach and make them more independent, quote unquote, that way. But it usually doesn't work out all that well. So what I wanted to really bring home about this is that children don't really need to be controlled. They really just need to be understood. And understanding children means understanding development. A child is not a mini adult. They're not like that medically or physically. They're not like that mentally, and they're not like that emotionally. And most people have very vague recollections of early childhood and a very limited memory of many of the early childhood years. And, there are reasons for that. Relating to a child is really understanding where they are at in terms of development. So for those of you that don't know this, I'm actually trained as an anthroposophic physician. And that's the medicine that's an extension of the anthroposophic philosophy of Rudolf Steiner. So in this philosophy, humans are considered to be spiritual beings having a physical experience. And so every time we feed or teach or administer medicine or any other relationship to another human, we take this into consideration. Waldorf schooling, I'm assuming many people have heard of that, is anthroposophically extended education, for example. And in this method of teaching, attention is paid to how a child's developing in order to determine if that child's ready for a particular teaching method or topic. And in parenting, the same fundamentals apply. So right now I'm going to give you a brief overview of how a child develops and how that has a bearing on your expectations and how that's actually going to change your parenting over time. So this particular diagram is an overview of what a child kind of goes through over the first 21 years. So we have 3 cycles of 7 years here. And there are other cycles as people become adults that we can talk about if you're interested in a different context as an adult. But in the first 7 years, a child is really focused on imitation and learning how to use the body and learning how to use the senses. And this is a big challenge for a parent because what you see in your child in this time frame is highly dependent on you. The next 7 years are the first years of school. And in this time frame, a child should really be focused on the imagination, on pretend play, and the development as they get a bit older on the awareness of feelings. And then this brings us to the third stage where kids learn who they are in relationship to themselves and to others. Parents who had themselves had a lot of difficulty in this stage of development often find that when their children reach this age, a lot of conflict arises. And maybe you already have kids in this stage, or you've gone through this, or you remember that those were difficult years for you. But it's often a huge trigger for a parent, and it's not uncommon for many people to have developmental issues in the pubertal to young adult phase. So I thought I would try to do a little bit of fun scribbling today. I'm going to just turn a whiteboard on, and I'm going to put on a pen or pencil. And we're going to just see if we can draw on this as I'm telling you a little bit about this. So I thought you would be interested in kind of the phases of development of children, because when I first learned about the phases of development of children, especially from an anthroposophic perspective, it really helped me to understand why certain things are appropriate for some children and others are not. So let's just, like, for the sake of argument, start with year one. You know, in the first year of life, a child is really struggling to overcome the body weight, the heaviness of matter. And the goal of the first year is really to bring the body into an upright position and get those hands, which are the organs of freedom, free. So we have very unspecialized hands as human beings. You know, it's unlike, say, if you look at a specialized kind of hand structure, like a bird, you know, a bird wing. A bird wing is designed for, you know, very, very specific task. But in a human being, you can do the most specialized activities with these very unspecialized hands, but you have to actually learn how to use them. And I'm sure if you've had children, you've had the experience of seeing a child glare and look at its hands almost as a first object of attention. As soon as they can kind of learn how to see, they start to learn to stare at their hands and move their hands, and they start to grab things with their hands. So as you're going through the first year and you're starting to see this upright position starting to take place, so you start to go from crawling to holding oneself up and to starting to walk, you see that children have this accentuation on the vertical. So if we could make a symbol of what year one looks like, it's this, like a line. It's where the kid learns how to be upright in this zone. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but I'm going to hopefully, I don't think I have any other arrows. So just roll with me as I'm pointing at things you might not see it. So this is the symbol of the first year. It's learning how to be vertical. And this is really the first step that's so different, even a human being compared to other animals. Human beings are upright. Other animals can stand upright in the position for a short while, but human beings spend their entire journeys upright. Now, if you look at coloring of a kid that has a pencil at this age, this is what you see. You see up and down strokes, pages and pages of this. I don't know if you remember that from your own children. A lot of the time it's a fisted kind of grasp on the pencil, where the pencil is kind of out the bottom of the hand and the thumb is upright. And you see these accentuations, these vertical striations. And this is really telling you something very strong about where the brain development is at this point. It doesn't mean that they're not there and engaged with you, but they have a certain quality of consciousness that's really devoted to something very particular. And then when you get to the second year, I'm just going to make a diagram here to represent the second year. You go from the vertical to, and if we could picture this as the top of the head, to the awareness that goes around the body in the horizontal. So this is a child in the middle, and then the horizontal. Everything goes horizontal in the second year because the child wants to learn how to walk, and it wants to speak and interact. And how you do that is not by going up, but going out. So at this stage, you start to see this communication accentuation, and we start to see children listening to and imitating the movements of speech. They're starting to create more meaningful, words and babbling. Sometimes it takes kids a little bit of time to do that, but this is the gesture of the second year. And you'll also start to see that the drawing starts to look a little bit different. You might actually start to see circles in the drawing like this. And then by the third year, you're going to see something a little bit different. You're going to see integration of the vertical and the horizontal. So this is a slightly different symbol. So you're now upright, you're horizontally looking for other people or other children. You're becoming social with your languages and your ability to communicate, and you start to learn how to think. Somewhere in the third year, children start to use the word I. Prior to that, they won't refer to themselves as I. They will say things like, I do, or Joe will do it. Joe does it. Joe make it go. They don't use the term I. And the reasoning for that is they actually do not have a sense of I until about this time frame. It always strikes me as odd when I see somebody trying to rationalize with a 2 to 3 year old. 2 to 3 year olds are not rational. They'll pay attention to you. They can understand to a degree what you're asking them. But they don't have a sense of themselves as being other. And they don't have a sense of having like a kind of boundary that would delineate their behavior as being different than what's going on around them. There's just no sense of that. Now, if you have, sometimes kids will show up with autism spectrum disorders at this time, and you can see that in those kids, the horizontal development has been disturbed. And this can actually be accentuated if the first year has just had too much noise or activity or stimulation without enough freedom to explore. So there's a lot of fear that could potentially be present. This is a time we do a lot of vaccinations, a lot of challenges to the body energy. And so sometimes you get a little bit of shockiness in a child at this age. If there's abuse at this age, you really harm the identity. You'll see abuse at this age as the cause of very severe psychological disturbance later. And it's a kind of abuse that typically creates trust issues, and also respectlessness. If this abuse happens before the age of 3, it just really goes right into the body memory. It is not going into the reflective memory. So people won't remember it, even if it was quite marked. It's very important to have a child that's been in those circumstances be in a respectful and supportive environment. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen, and it's not recognized until substantially later. It turns out, though, that if you are coming in a bad environment, the ability to become a good citizen is really related to having a good relationship to someone, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a parent. And that is a key factor. If a child makes friend with the gas station attendant, or the post person, or somebody who is like a neutral neighbor, and the child can see an abusive example of an adult, the child will adopt that person mentally, and that can help them a lot. And so when we see kids put into care where there are good adult role models, it can really make a huge difference. Now, when you start to get into the 4th year, you're starting to see more of the feeling life starting to develop. After the 4th year, repetition kind of naturally stops. Before that age, you see a lot of repetition. Kids want to repeat things over and over again, and they start to stop, about 4. By about the 5th year, I'm just going to clear these symbols here. By the 5th year, you see a child kind of really coming into their heart space. This is where, they're really coming into the future potential that's really creative. And the 5th year is really a year of fantasy. There's a lot of playing and imitating everything. They're very good at using the middle senses. So smell and taste and sight and warmth. You're seeing kids starting to, come into like a real liberation of growing forces. You might even start to see the teeth change starting around the 5th year. And they're absolutely in a fantasy world. They tell stories that can't be true because they actually perceive their thoughts so clearly that they're like reality. So, when adults laugh at the imaginations of children at this age, they're failing to recognize that child is in a beautiful imaginative fantasy. And when you try to bring a child like that, quote unquote, to reality, you're not supporting the normal development of that child. The best thing you can do is get on the floor with them and participate in the imagination. Children at that age should be in like fairy tales and everything that is imaginative and creative. It creates actually a lot of a good foundation for creativity later. Now, I know there's an emphasis for many people on putting children in school very early, but sometimes as a consequence, you lose this imaginative strategy. And we wonder sometimes why people have so much difficulty with creativity later on. It's because we stifle it at this age in particular, because we tend to put them in circumstances where, the early education emphasis is on logic. But if you have a particularly fantasy-rich child, it's not a good age to put a child in school. Now, by the time you get to this age, if you have a child that's creating a fixation about something, or they have a certain poor behavior, the best way to deal with it is to actually ignore it until it goes away. So do not pay any attention to it at all, negative or positive. Now, when you get to be a little bit older, 6, you're going to come down in energy, kind of down into this zone, a little bit more into the belly energy, and then down into the limbs. So what you start to see when you get to be about age 6 is you see kids suddenly really starting to come into the limb system a little bit better. And then the child starts to want to have real things. So instead of having an imaginative box for a car, they want the real car, or they want the real little shop, and they start to play with reality. So, and that window is a little bit different from kid to kid. But, if they're still in fantasy rich, you want to stay there with them until they start to move the needle towards the real. Now, by the time you get to age 7, there's a real will to learn through listening. There's a security and there's a protective, attitude that, precedes curiosity for what comes. In this year, you start to see lots of the time girls will start to cross their arms over their stomachs. They become very aware that they're kind of coming into that zone. By the time 8 comes around, a child of around 8, you start to see things that are to do with memory. Sorry for my bad handwriting here. But children at this age love to memorize things. They like to recite things. They like to do songs or poems. And this is the strength of the 8-year-old. They're starting to actually come down into a kind of development where they're starting to form the early basis of strong and true memory. And a lot of the time, if you look back in your own memories, you will find that a lot of the things start to really gel by about this age. And, so this is the end of grade 1, beginning of grade 2, a lot of the time, somewhere in there. Now, by the time you get to 9, 9 is a very interesting year for most children because they start to feel they start to feel their own self-consciousness. They start to become very aware that they are not their mothers, they're not their brother or friend or teacher, but they're separated from other people. So it's a kind of thinking connection that's different than what you've seen. So I like to put I am not, so there's a lot of confusion that happens around this time because children realize not all people are the same, and what's important to all children or all people is not important to all people. There's individuals within that. It's a really huge feeling of being incomplete. And a lot of the time you'll see a lot of fantasies here around, being adopted or, somehow they've been put with the wrong family or the wrong friends. And when you see children picked out at school at this age, it can be very, very bad news. Children get very frustrated. They can abandon authority figures very quickly if they feel like they're being isolated even further. So this is a bad age for sending kids away, either in punishment or whatnot. Don't send your kids away. Bring them in closer to you when they are struggling here. By age 10, you might also already start to see the voice is starting to change. And the child starts to develop, this kind of self-conscious thinking, which is very different. They start to have a love for things to do with their hands. They like to create beautiful things. And so sometimes the solution in a 10-year-old is to learn how to help them to create something. This is a great time for, drawing and woodworking and painting. If they have a problem, sometimes you can create a project and discuss the problem through the project. Just gonna clear this and start again. By the time you get to be about 11, children start to realize there's a kind of a development in language. So they start to separate language from thinking. And you have to think about this a little bit hard to figure out what I'm talking about. It's a time where kids start to learn that words can have more than one meaning. So, and that actually means that there's a whole other world of nuance that comes up. And kids at this age, they start to learn jokes that are based on, those kind of double word meanings, and they think they're hysterical. So, if they're conscious, they can start to learn the difference between thinking and speaking. So, instead of sharing everything that's in their thought process directly as language, they'll start to be able to separate how they think about something and what they actually say about something. And so you have to pay attention to this, because in a way, to a parent, it starts to look as though a parent or a child stops speaking to you. That's not true, but they start to cultivate their own inner life. And so if you try and force a child of this age to share with you, it's not going to work the same as when they were 10. You now have to actually start to learn how to respect that child has their own opinion. Now at 12, children are really right in the heart. They just go right there. And this is the middle of childhood, and kids are really usually most harmonious at this age. They're big helpers, as long as they haven't been too disappointed by other people. There's a whole bunch of forces that become free in the 12-year-old. And so, this is a time where, building your relationship is very easy, typically, unless you've had some problems in the previous years that you didn't address that well, because you can actually really start to have heart-to-hearts with children of this age and build a relationship in a different way. Now, you still need to be a parent, obviously, but they just have a different perspective on things at 12. Now, when they hit 13, there starts to be a lot more movement into pubertal development. So they're starting to connect, much more into the gonadal area. And there's all sorts of new qualities of feeling and emotion being experienced. Now, this is a time frame where when this starts happening, there can actually be a lot of destructive potential. You can really start to see kids having kind of pubertal crises at this age. And it's because they're kind of in this window where they're graduating from childhood, but they are not yet adults. And this is kind of a point of no return. They can't really see their future. They're not big enough to start creating that. And yet there's a part of a child at this age that really longs to continue to be a child. And so there's going to be lots of times where you're going to be going back and forth a little bit between those two things. Don't require your child to pick a side, immediately, and that they're so old now and that they're going to have it all figured out. This is too young for that. This is actually the age where if this goes poorly, you'll see children who end up in, like potentially destructive groups. or they start to think about certain things as being cool. This is the time where the music, the tone of the music starts to change a lot. You see kids going from things that are fairly neutral sometimes to the more driving rock rhythms or rap rhythms. There's a lot of, explicitness in the music that children start to become attracted to. And you need to really have an active role in reviewing what they're listening to and having a discussion about what that actually does to a child or a person as they grow older, because you don't want kids totally into their, into their gonads at this age. So, like I said, what you really want is balance here between child behavior and adult behavior. So you need to find a little bit of patience. Now, lots of time by this age, kids can fake being very adult. But if you leave them to their own devices here, they will become very poor adults. They must have limits. This is the age where lots of stuff starts occurring with parents, because they start to realize there's certain things that they did not handle very well. And you want to be very careful about that. So you've got to deal with your own stuff and look back at what happened to you, and be honest to a point with your children at this age, and really hold them close. Know all their friends, know everything that they're doing. Even if they don't like it, at some point it'll create what you're wanting, and that is a child that turns to you first and not to the peer group first. So you need to be involved in all of that. Don't let them spend lots of time in unsupervised conditions. You can have them in supervised conditions or short windows with unsupervised, but don't let go of your kids in this year. Now, when you start to hit a little bit older than this, 14, 15, at 14, kids are really struggling to figure out what they're feeling, because their bodies have really changed, and it's almost like they need to learn it again. And kids will often start to form very, very strong companion bonds at this age, where it feels very, very like survival oriented to them. So again, you have to be in there with them about that. Ideally, too, it wouldn't be that they become attached necessarily to a peer friend as strongly as something that they really connect to. If you can help them identify what they're feeling and help them explore their feelings in other ways, or with things that they otherwise enjoy, that can really help buffer that unhealthy attachment. If the wrong companionship comes at this age, it can be quite detrimental. Now, at 15, it's starting to move away into actually understanding their feelings. This is really the beginning of the liberation of the ego organization, or the I am. And that really wants to consciously direct emotions and thoughts. So you see a much different kind of maturity here, and kids tend to start to individuate much better here. And you want to be watching for signs of that and encourage that in this age. Now, by the time you get to be 16, you start to really see the polarity of the male and female. And then as you're kind of going up into the higher teen years, 17, 18, what really should start to happen is you should start to see people or kids having the impulse to realize that there's a huge amount of work out there in the world, that the world is actually going to require a lot from them, and the feeling that they can't do very much to affect it. There's a very strong requirement for ideals here. And so sometimes we get kids that just have the impulse to leave school at this time. This is one of the times where we have the most suicide, because children at this age get very confused about how they're going to actually meet even their own expectations. Now, if they can manage to find something that they really care about at this age, something that really motivates them or makes them feel like they can contribute, And you might have to work with them on that. They usually by this age then start to find a sense of where they want to go. Now, they might not know all the details of that. Um, and they're often very busy with just getting through, high school at this age without a particular direction. But it's really important that they start to connect to things that they really feel are going to be important to them in the long run. So when you start to see threads like that, help your child to hold it. And then by the time they get to be 18, 19, they'll become more centered. They'll start to learn how to trust their center, especially if they have you in their back corner. So, as you kind of get in the next couple of years, this whole capacity for using your will forces and really experiencing your willpower to do what it is that you really trust you need to do gets deeper and deeper. And of course, kids start to enter university and start to really care about all sorts of things they've never even heard of before. And then, slowly growth comes to a physical end in this time. So at this time, it's also a very good time to have adults, kids, adults, they're technically adults, 18, 19, to actually reconnect to other younger children. This is a good time for them to be camp counselors. That is actually a very developmental experience for a person of this age to really reconnect to the forces of childhood and to really review for themselves inside what they've experienced. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. Like there's just big changes, the massive changes in how kids are at different ages. And if you can appreciate that, you're going to find that you really connect to them much better because you have a sense of where they are. And, the workshop that we're hoping to do in September here is hopefully going to spend much more time on the details of how you might do that. Okay, now I have to figure out how to turn that off. There we go. So it's really time to learn how to get on the same team as your child, and become your coach in a positive and supportive way. It's if you understand where they are, you will understand what to give and what to encourage. It's very easy to fall into a pattern of giving all your time, energy, and attention to your child, and that leaves you feeling drained. It's very important that children of all ages observe you living your life to the fullest because they learn by imitating you. So if you want a child that expects everything to be done for them, then do everything for your child. But if you don't want that, and I'm suggesting you probably don't, you just got to show them how you figured out how to live authentically. And they'll naturally find their own way to do so because really they're doing much more to imitate you than to invent that for themselves. They're not inventing it for themselves. It looks like they are, but they are not. So if you don't feel like you found your true self, parenting can be a huge catalyst to finding out. Because as you'll find out if you haven't already, a child of a certain age becomes very aware of the inconsistencies in your values and in your character. And if you respond badly to that, it doesn't go well with yourself or your child because they know you're lying to them. But if you can understand the trigger when it comes, you really stand a good chance of becoming more aware and using that information, to your advantage. So from my perspective, there's three kind of qualities you've got to embody in order to be your child's coach. Mean what you say and what you do. Consistency is important. If you know what you value, you can maintain consistency over time. And then once a decision is made, just stand by it. It creates a natural respect. Number two, take your own work seriously, your own tasks that allow the child to follow and imitate. Cultivate your own identity, even when your kid's developing their own identity, and find joy in what's different in your child. Don't expect them to love everything you do, and support them in what they like too. And then probably the third most important quality is to really learn to listen. A child will typically tell you what you need to know if you can just stop talking long enough to hear what they have to say. And ask questions until you understand what to say, and make them very, very open-ended. Many parenting mistakes are made by jumping in to fix something that's really not broken. It doesn't need fixing. It just needs understanding or reevaluation so that you can help maybe bring more information into a situation that your child doesn't fully understand and has made conclusions about. We just hop in way too quickly. So like I said, be consistent. Do your own thing. and allow your child to do theirs, and then really listen. Now, I also want to kind of put in a plug for, especially early on, children should not be shut down emotionally by their parents. Lots of parents do this. Stop doing that. As adults, we have words to describe how we're feeling, and we can talk to ourselves about it inside our head. A young child cannot do that. They don't have the language. They don't have the meaning to assign anything to the emotions they feel. They just get all fired up, and the feelings that they result can be totally overwhelming. And if your child is having an emotional storm, you need to be the safe harbor. Just be there. Just hold them. Again, you don't have to fix it. You can understand. You can be boundaried. You don't have to get right in the thick of them and start crying yourself. That doesn't help either. You just are going to be the hug boundary. And then when they've calmed, and it doesn't matter what the emotion is, you need to allow children to have emotional expression. Just think about how you feel if somebody that you know shuts down your emotions. It doesn't work as an adult either. It is, triply uncomfortable for a child. So, there's a wide variety of needs that your child can have, but the 8 core basic human needs are these: unconditional love, connection, attention, empathy, affection, appreciation, growth, and independence. These are the needs that a human being has. So if your child is experiencing anything like an anger or a sadness, feel into those 8 core needs and see if there's something that actually the child's really asking you for that they can't communicate to you, and you need to reassess with them. It's a huge balancing act, I think, is really what it comes down to. Meeting a list of needs might be simple enough, but, as you come to understand, carrying that out can be a big balancing act. If you notice that unconditional love and independence are both on the list, it means your child really needs a balance of both. You might be really great at unconditional love and not so great with letting go in independence, and you need to work on that quality. And you need to understand it's you that needs to work on it and create the conditions for that to develop in your child. So lots of items on that list can come easily to you. But if you feel disconnected and you have a strong desire to connect, you don't want to smother a baby or overcompensate, but you want to keep in mind that these qualities that your children really need should come from you. So no matter what age your child is, they're going to point out to you they're not a baby anymore, or not a little kid anymore. And of course, it can be a little bit heartbreaking because they're growing up so fast, but you can start to identify opportunities for independence. Make a list of things your child can be doing themselves. Discuss that list with your child if they're old enough to, or make it together. Little kids can help you with a lot of things. In Montessori education, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but there's a kind of strategy to help kids learn how to do those things themselves. So as an example, in our kitchen, my child always had a drawer of plates and knives and spoons and things and snacks within reach. They didn't have to ask. My son had a stool. He could reach pretty much anything in the kitchen. If he was feeling like he wanted to go and do something, he was allowed. And there's lots of ways that you can encourage independence at that level. It doesn't mean they have to do everything for themselves. They're not cooking your dinner, but they feel like they are trusted to participate. You can also negotiate or compromise for tasks they're not thrilled about, because negotiation skills are important for a child. And if you start that young and you kind of go, okay, well, do you think you could do this? That's really an important parenting strategy. Also consider what the circumstances are. Adults have to be adult regardless of what the circumstances are for the most part. But if your kid is sick or tired or stressed or they're adjusting to a change, don't throw new things on them. Don't be too harsh on them. Children, again, are in development, and it's so difficult when you don't have a ticker tape coming out of the belly button to see that, maybe they're just overwhelmed and they actually need your support and they're not just testing their limits all the time. I think also you need to be, ready for mistakes. Kids will make mistakes. Adults will make mistakes. Juice is going to spill. It's just going to happen. So just show kids how to clean stuff up without criticism. And, just assure them it happens to everyone. There isn't anyone on this call that hasn't spilled a drink. And kids will do that. Now, if it's, they don't have enough practice to do what you're asking them to do, then you're going to have to find a different solution. If they're not old enough for a glass, they're not old enough for a glass. But don't rush to solve an issue. If there's a mistake, give the child a minute to figure it out. If they spill something, give them a minute to figure out what to do about it. Don't rush in with anger. It's very damaging to a child to not feel trusted. And if they feel stumped, offer them an idea. Go, I bet you we could wipe that up with this instead of panicking. Yeah, you're going to stain something every once in a while, but you're going to make up for it by having a kid that trusts that you know how to trust them. Obviously we're only human. We can't be calm and cool and collected. And there's going to be times as our kids get older that we have to, we can't turn everything into a teaching moment and we slip up. And you have to recognize that that's happened, and you have to connect with your child face to face and apologize sometimes if you've been behaving poorly. Share your feelings in a way that a child can understand. They don't need to know all the minutiae of what's happening to you. They just know, I feel like this when you don't listen to me when I'm asking you to do this particular thing, and let them share theirs. And then figure out how to negotiate around that need for your child and also that need for, whatever it is that you're valuing in your family, whatever that ends up being. So we're coming pretty close to the end of the hour. And so I just want to reiterate, you came into parenthood really to become a leader, and it really allows you the opportunity to fully step into that role and really do your part in preparing the next generation and maybe re-examining some of the things that you felt were issues that you could process through and find new ways of handling. So just let this be the beginning of learning to really listen and be present with your children. Let it be the end of the blaming, the shaming your children, because you know that those are dated tactics and they just cause more stress and emotional harm than good. And if you can just find ways of breaking the cycles of things that you don't appreciate about your own parenting, and really re-examine your children's behavior in the light of those things, I think you'll find that there's some strategies you can use to create something a little bit different. So thank you so much for taking this whole hour out of your day to listen to me talk to you about child development. I'm hoping that you got a couple of little clues about things that maybe you didn't know about before with respect to how children develop and how that actually changes how you can relate to them. So, just you showing up proves that you're someone who loves your child enough, you're ready to take the time to examine that. So I wish you the very best of luck in taking some new strategies. And if you have questions after this webinar, you can certainly give us an email at info@resonance-wellness.com. So that's our front desk email. And in the meantime, I will hope to see you at our next webinar in October or our live event in September. All right, take care of yourselves and have a good evening. Thanks for watching. I love to connect to my patient community to inform and inspire, and I hope you'll join us again in the near future. Don't forget to check out helpingdrmom.com for more webinars and events.